The Willow Heights mansion had stood on the edge of town for nearly a century, weathered by time and haunted by whispers of tragedy. Built in 1923, it had once been the glittering centerpiece of the town's high society, hosting grand parties filled with jazz, champagne, and opulence. But its glory days ended in 1932 during a legendary gala. That night, a fire broke out in the ballroom, killing several guests and leaving the mansion in ruins. Though it was rebuilt, it never regained its charm. Over the decades, it was abandoned, its walls left to crumble, its windows shattered by vandals, and its stories swallowed by silence. For Emily and her friends, though, the mansion was irresistible. Every year they hosted a themed Diddy party, recreating the glamour of the jazz age with costumes, music, and decor. And this year they decided to go all out by renting Willow Heights. It was perfect, eerie, extravagant, and steeped in history. The night of the party, guests arrived dressed in flapper dresses, pinstriped suits, and feathered headbands. The mansion had been transformed into a scene from the 1920s. String lights cast a golden glow over the peeling wallpaper, and antique furniture brought a touch of elegance to the crumbling space. A vintage gramophone played scratchy jazz records, filling the air with a nostalgic hum. Emily, the mastermind behind the event, floated through the crowd, checking that everyone had a drink and was enjoying themselves. She felt a twinge of pride. Despite the mansion's creepy reputation, the party was a success. The laughter of guests mixed with the music, and the atmosphere buzzed with life. But as the night wore on, something began to feel off. Emily first noticed him near the grand staircase, a man in an immaculate white suit with a blood-red tie, standing still amidst the lively crowd. In one hand, he held a gleaming brass trumpet. His face was sharp, almost too perfect, like a figure from an old photograph brought to life. His hair was slicked back, and his pale skin seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Emily assumed he was a guest, someone's +1, perhaps. But his presence unsettled her. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't laughing, dancing, or even speaking. He simply stood there, watching the crowd with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. She nudged her best friend, Liam, who was nursing a glass of champagne nearby. "Do you know that guy?" she asked, motioning towards the staircase. Liam squinted. "No clue. He's got the look, though. Maybe he's part of the theme." Emily frowned. "I didn't hire anyone to perform." Liam shrugged. "Well, he's definitely committed to the aesthetic." Emily tried to brush off her unease, but the man's presence lingered in the back of her mind. She kept an eye on him as she mingled, but every time she tried to approach, he seemed to vanish into the crowd. At around 10 p.m., the gramophone abruptly stopped playing mid-song. The lively chatter of the crowd quieted as guests glanced around in confusion. Emily moved to check the machine, assuming it was a technical issue, when a sharp, haunting note pierced the air. It was a single trumpet note, clear and deliberate, and it seemed to echo from the far end of the room. The crowd turned, murmuring nervously. "Who's playing that?" someone asked. "I thought there wasn't going to be live music," another added. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. She scanned the room, but the man in the white suit was nowhere to be seen. Another note followed, this one slower and more mournful. The sound was chilling, as though it carried a sadness too deep for words. Emily's heart raced as the realization hit her. The sound was coming from upstairs. Liam appeared at her side. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice hushed. Emily nodded. "It's him. It has to be." "Who?" "The man with the trumpet. "I swear, Liam, he was here earlier." Liam gave her a skeptical look, but stayed close as the two of them headed toward the staircase. Several guests followed, curious and uneasy. The air grew colder as Emily and Liam climbed the stairs. The lively atmosphere of the party seemed to fade with every step, replaced by an oppressive silence. At the top of the stairs, they saw a faint light spilling out from a room at the end of the hall. Emily hesitated, but Liam urged her forward. Pushing open the door, they found themselves in a grand ballroom. Unlike the rest of the mansion, which was decaying and dusty, this room was immaculate. The chandeliers sparkled, the hardwood floor gleamed, and golden accents glinted in the light. In the center of the room stood the man in the white suit. He held the trumpet to his lips, playing a slow, mournful tune. His back was to them, but his presence was overwhelming, as if the room itself revolved around him. Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling. The man stopped playing and turned to face them. His eyes were dark and hollow, and his smile was chilling. "Welcome to the party," he said, his voice smooth but unnatural. Behind him, ghostly figures began to materialize. They were dressed in 1920s attire, flapper dresses, tuxedos, and feathered headbands, but their faces were pale, their movements jerky and unnatural. Emily stumbled backward. "This can't be real," she whispered. Liam grabbed her arm. "We need to leave, now." The ghostly figures moved toward them, their lifeless eyes fixed on Emily and Liam. The man in the white suit raised his trumpet again, and a haunting melody filled the room. The figures began to dance, their movements in time with the mournful tune. Emily and Liam turned to run, but the ballroom doors slammed shut. The temperature dropped, and their breaths came out in visible puffs. "Please," Emily begged, her voice shaking. "What do you want?" The man lowered his trumpet. "This house belongs to us," he said, "and so does the party. We've been waiting for someone to bring it back to life." Emily's mind raced. The stories of the fire, the lives lost. They weren't just rumors. These were the guests of the fateful gala, trapped in an eternal limbo. "You can have the house," Liam said, his voice panicked. "We'll leave right now." The man shook his head. "It's too late. You're part of the party now." The ghostly figures surrounded them, their icy hands reaching out. Emily screamed as the room spun, the music growing louder and louder until it drowned out everything else. When the remaining guests found the ballroom, it was empty. Emily and Liam were gone, and the room was once again in ruins, dusty, decayed, and silent. The party ended abruptly, and no one ever returned to Willow Heights Mansion. But on quiet nights, passers-by swear they can hear the faint sound of a trumpet playing a mournful tune, as though the party is still going on, waiting for its next guests to join. The Diddy party was always the highlight of the year for Olivia and her friends. This time, however, it would be unlike any they'd experienced. The venue they had chosen, an abandoned Victorian estate known as Blackthorn Manor, had a sinister history that Olivia deliberately kept from the rest of the group. Blackthorn Manor had been left to rot for decades, its grand halls and ornate staircases reduced to dust-covered relics. The last known owner, a reclusive millionaire named Edward Blackthorn, had disappeared during a party in 1919. According to town whispers, he had vanished mid-toast, leaving behind a glass of champagne on the grand piano. No one ever saw him again, and the few guests who remained in the house that night swore they saw shadows moving on their own. The creepy legend made Blackthorn Manor the perfect spot for the annual Diddy party. Olivia, being the event's organizer, leaned into the haunted theme, filling the house with fake cobwebs, flickering LED candles, and eerie vintage decor. Everyone arrived in 1920s attire, laughing, drinking, and marveling at how the crumbling mansion looked like something straight out of a horror movie. As the party got underway, the air buzzed with excitement and mischief. The gramophone spun old jazz records, and the ballroom floor filled with costumed guests, some pretending to waltz, others doing modern spins on vintage dances. It was Olivia's dream come true, a perfect blend of glamour and the macabre. But as the clock struck 10, something shifted. Olivia was standing by the grand staircase, admiring how well the party had come together, when she saw him. At first, he was just a figure in the distance, partially obscured by the shadows of the hallway. He was tall, dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit with a top hat tilted at an elegant angle. Something about him caught her attention, the way he stood unnaturally still, as if waiting for something. She watched as he slowly stepped into the light, his face pale but striking, like a photograph faded by time. His eyes locked onto hers, and Olivia felt an inexplicable chill race down her spine. She looked away, embarrassed to be staring, and turned to her friend Mia, who was chatting nearby. "Who's that?" Olivia asked, nodding toward the man. Mia glanced over her shoulder. "Who?" "That guy in the hallway, the one in the top hat." Mia frowned. "I don't see anyone." Olivia turned back, but the hallway was empty. Shrugging it off as a trick of the dim lighting, Olivia returned to mingling with the guests. The night wore on, and the party showed no signs of slowing down. Then, just before midnight, the gramophone stopped playing mid-song. A collective groan filled the ballroom. "Relax, people," Olivia called out. "Probably just a loose connection. I'll check it out." The gramophone was on a table in the corner of the ballroom, but when Olivia approached it, she saw that the needle hadn't just stopped. It had snapped in two. "Great," she muttered. As she examined the broken piece, a low murmur rippled through the room. Olivia looked up to find the guests staring toward the ballroom's double doors, which had swung open on their own. Beyond them, the hallway was pitch black, except for a faint, flickering light emanating from one of the side rooms. A nervous laugh broke the silence. "Who set up the creepy light show?" someone asked. Olivia didn't respond. She hadn't arranged anything like that. Curious, and a little spooked, she grabbed one of the LED candles from a nearby table and stepped into the hallway. The laughter and chatter from the ballroom faded as she approached the flickering light. The room at the end of the hall was one of the manor's old sitting rooms, its faded wallpaper peeling away to reveal the bare wood beneath. In the center of the room stood a single candle, burning with a real flame, something Olivia knew she hadn't brought. Her reflection flickered in the cracked mirror above the fireplace, but as she stepped closer, she froze. There was another figure in the mirror standing just behind her. A man in a black suit. Olivia spun around, but the room was empty. Her heart pounded in her chest as she backed away, her eyes darting around the dark corners of the room. That was when she noticed the shadows. They were moving. At first it was subtle, a flicker at the edge of her vision. But as she stood frozen, the shadows seemed to grow darker, pooling together and stretching across the walls like ink spilled in water. A low, guttural whisper filled the air, too faint to make out the words. It was coming from all around her, rising and falling in a rhythm that reminded her of chanting. "Olivia?" Her name. The whisper spoke her name. Without thinking, she turned and bolted back towards the ballroom. She didn't stop until she was surrounded by the warmth and laughter of the other guests. "Are you okay?" Mia asked, noticing Olivia's pale face. "There's something in the house," Olivia stammered. Mia laughed nervously. "Yeah, that's kind of the point, isn't it? Haunted theme and all." "No," Olivia said, her voice trembling. "This isn't part of the party." As midnight approached, the atmosphere in the ballroom grew heavier. Several guests commented on the sudden drop in temperature, and the once lively conversations began to dwindle into uneasy murmurs. Then the clock struck 12, and the chandelier above the ballroom dimmed, its crystals casting eerie shadows across the walls. The man in the black suit appeared at the top of the grand staircase. This time, everyone saw him. A hush fell over the room as he descended the stairs, his movements smooth and deliberate. When he reached the bottom step, he stopped and raised a hand, as if commanding attention. "You've woken the house," he said, his voice low and resonant. "And now, you must join us." The guests looked at one another, unsure whether this was part of the night's entertainment. But Olivia knew it wasn't. The shadows began to move again, creeping across the floor and wrapping around the guests' feet like tendrils. One by one, the partygoers froze, their faces twisted in silent terror as the shadows engulfed them. Olivia grabbed Mia's arm. "We have to get out of here!" But as they ran for the exit, the double doors slammed shut. The man in the black suit raised a glass that seemed to materialize out of thin air. "To the party," he said, his smile chilling. "May it never end." Olivia watched in horror as the shadows began to rise, forming ghostly figures in 1920s attire. They danced to a tune only they could hear, their hollow eyes fixed on the remaining guests. Mia screamed as one of the shadowy figures reached for her, its hand passing through her skin and leaving frostbite in its wake. Desperate, Olivia remembered the story of Edward Blackthorne and his ominous toast. She grabbed a champagne flute from a nearby table, raised it high, and shouted, "To Edward Blackthorne, may you rest in peace." For a moment, everything stopped. The shadows froze. The man in the black suit lowered his glass and the room fell deathly silent. Then, with a deafening crash, the chandelier shattered, plunging the room into darkness. When Olivia woke up, she was lying on the lawn outside Blackthorne Manor. The sun was rising, casting a golden light over the crumbling estate. Mia and a handful of other guests were scattered nearby, dazed but alive. The rest of the partygoers were gone. Olivia never spoke of what happened that night, but she couldn't escape the feeling that something, someone, was still watching her, and every so often, in the quiet of the night, she would hear the faint echo of jazz music, as if the party at Blackthorne Manor was still going on, waiting for its next toast. Bethany loved hosting parties, and her latest idea, a themed Diddy party, was her most ambitious yet. She rented an old mansion on the outskirts of town, a place known for its charm and eerie history. Built in the 1920s, it had hosted countless gatherings in its heyday, but had fallen into disrepair over the decades. Its creaky wooden floors, dusty chandeliers, and peeling wallpaper made it the perfect setting for her jazz-era soiree. The guest list was small, just 40 close friends and a few +1s. Everyone was required to dress like they'd stepped out of the Roaring '20s, Flappers, jazz musicians, and dapper gentlemen filled the grand hall as the evening kicked off. The air was alive with the sound of smooth jazz, laughter, and the clink of cocktail glasses. By 10 p.m., the party was in full swing. Bethany was making rounds, chatting with her friends and ensuring everyone had a drink. That's when she noticed him for the first time, a man standing near the piano at the far end of the room. He wore a sleek black suit, a bowler hat, and polished shoes that reflected the dim light of the chandelier. In his hand was a weathered leather case. Bethany didn't recognize him, which wasn't unusual. She had told her friends they could bring guests, so she assumed he was someone's +1. Yet something about him felt off. He wasn't mingling or drinking, just standing there, watching the crowd with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Hey, Liam," Bethany said, nudging her best friend. "Do you know that guy by the piano?" Liam glanced over. "No clue. He's got the look down, though. Maybe he's an actor you hired for the vibe?" Bethany shook her head. "I didn't hire anyone." Liam laughed. "Well, he's either really into the theme or a party crasher." Bethany decided to keep an eye on him, but as the night went on, the man didn't move from his spot. Guests began to notice him, too. Whispers spread through the room. "Who's that guy? He's kind of creepy, isn't he? Did he even bring a drink?" By midnight, the party began winding down. Guests trickled out, leaving only Bethany, Liam, and a few others to clean up. As they gathered empty glasses and plates, Bethany realized she hadn't seen the man leave. Curious, she scanned the room, but he was nowhere to be found. "Maybe he slipped out," Liam suggested. Bethany nodded, but her unease lingered. She walked over to the guest book she'd placed at the entrance, a fun little touch for her party. Flipping through the pages, she scanned the names for anyone unfamiliar. Near the bottom, a name caught her eye. Albert Godfrey, October 1927. She froze. The handwriting was elegant, written with an old-fashioned flourish. "Guys," she called, her voice trembling. "Who wrote this?" Her friends crowded around, peering at the page. "Albert Godfrey? That's not funny," Liam said, glancing at her. "Is someone playing a prank?" Bethany shook her head. "No one at this party would have written that. I mean, look at the date. 1927? Liam frowned and pulled out his phone. "Hold on." He typed furiously, his face growing pale as he read. "Oh no. Albert Godfrey was a jazz musician. He went missing in 1927. From this house. He was supposed to play at a party here, but disappeared before he could perform. Some say his ghost haunts the place." The group exchanged uneasy glances. "Stop," Bethany said, though her voice wavered. "That's just a coincidence." At that moment, the faint sound of a piano filled the air. The notes were soft, hesitant, as if someone were testing the keys. Bethany's stomach dropped. "The piano's in the next room." They moved as one toward the parlor. The old upright piano sat in the corner, its lid half closed. No one was near it. On the bench was the leather case the man had been holding earlier. Bethany reached out, her fingers trembling, and opened the case. Inside were yellowed sheet music, a tarnished pocket watch, and an old photograph. She held up the picture. It showed a group of people in 1920s attire, standing in the same room where they now stood. In the back of the group was the man from the party, the same bowler hat, the same suit, the same piercing stare. Bethany's heart raced. "This isn't possible." Liam's voice was barely above a whisper. "I told you, it's him." The air grew icy, and a sudden gust slammed the piano lid shut with a deafening bang. The group screamed, stumbling back. The photograph slipped from Bethany's hands and fluttered to the floor. As she bent to pick it up, she caught a glimpse of the mirror above the fireplace. The man was standing behind them. She whipped around, but the room was empty. The others saw her reaction and panicked. "What is it? What did you see?" "He was right there," she stammered, "in the mirror, watching us." Terrified, they fled the house, leaving behind the case, the photograph, and the lingering sound of faint, mournful jazz music. Bethany never returned to the mansion, and she never hosted another party again. But sometimes, late at night, she swears she can hear the soft hum of a piano playing a ghostly tune, as if Albert Godfrey is still waiting for his moment in the spotlight.